To welcome all of you, forgive my lousy English. I have to rearrange a little bit these things I prepared in Berlin for 18 hours of continuous lecturing. Now I have to do an improvised compression of what I tried to say. Fortunately, Professor Jacques has done yesterday some introduction, and I'd say that my little paper on the historical communication systems would be a good background lecture for today, and my other paper or version of software would cover some of the questions we'll address tomorrow. Because being here a trip to Venice, I have to this was a threefold concept of history of writing I wanted to present to you. Now it's more or less a twofold structure based on today on the first day something like a history of handwriting, and tomorrow history of printing, so to say. We all have to come into work this morning, sorry. Some remarks on the title, History of Writing. This is, as you may know, ambiguous, especially in English, when we had a conference long time ago in Stanford on writing, Écriture, Schrift. We really spelled out the different implications of writing, of Écriture, and of Schrift. Writing can mean writing as the act of writing, or writing as a system of valid signs. In this alternative, I plead for script as a finite, or in some cases infinite, set of signs. We can't know how ancient Chinese calligraphers moved their writing hand. This would be a history of writing, but we've got their calligraphic paintings. This would be a history of script in this sense. And the only condition in order to recognize paintings as script, you remember Jacques would be repetition, even if there are so infinitely many Chinese signs, they repeat themselves. Whereas the animals painted at the walls of Altamira and other caves, they don't recur. Insofar these animals we could call symbols, not signs. And these symbols, the mammoths and the lions and the buffaloes, might have to do something with the gods to whom will come back. Last year when I gave a lecture on 3 centuries of electricity, the 19th, the 20th, and the 21st, the first. And this was very modernist as for. This year I feel rather old-fashioned because the history of writing is mostly the ancient history of writing. The decisions what writing would become to mankind, if I put it so dramatically, occurred long before Jesus was crucified and so on and so on. So the first mental exercise we have to undergo probably is to put back for a moment our alphabetic consciousness of writing systems. We have to imagine that many writing systems or scripts on this globe have syllabic form, made a cuneiform form in the ancient Near East or in Japan. We and especially myself have to take into account the fact that numbers are signs inside a script in a writing system, so musical pitches in scores can occur in the form of script, and finally concepts can be written down as such, as may have been the case in very ancient Chinese, and which is surely the case in modern computer science. So far, my small remarks to the title. Now to my goals. What can we learn, if I may decide it, or if I may have any idea of your points and your interests and your dislikes and your likes? I think in going into writing and its history, we get a position against some very actual neurophysiological trash, as if every woman and every man, like a spider, produced his world out of himself, without any help of parents and teachers and scripts and systems and science around her or him. Second thing we could arrive at is a more precise feeling that reading and writing greatly differ. As every Hegel once used to know, you can write in darkness but not read. Goethe, the German poet, knew it too. And then we go back to the way we came to read and write. We learned it. We can tell a little bit our own archaeology on the level of elementary school system. Even when Michel Foucault tried to archaeologically analyze his French or European culture, he always had in mind the higher secondary school system, and that is why we made some little mistakes in this historical analysis. Whereas we go down to the very early years of our childhood, when we learn we go back almost to this dramatic moment where we could write for the first time our Christian name. And this is methodically my outspoken intention. We know we work here in the field of so-called cultural history, but there are so many, there have been so many cultural histories since 150 years that work top down. They start with the state or with the gods and go down from the state to the historical events, and from the historical events finally to the poets and the poetry, and finally to the individual, and how it came that the individual as such came into the world. And this then is Jacques Burckhart's griechische Kulturgeschichte of the ancient Greeks. And if you look for the writing system of the Greeks, that is for their alphabet, you find in 3 volumes 2 footnotes, very small. And this is what I criticize in this top-down approach to cultural history, to start from Hegelian high notions and trying to deduce it more or less to the concrete empirical facts and practices. And instead I propose the bottom-up approach, starting with writing systems, starting with elementary cultural techniques, yeah, and then building up more and more complex forms out of it. You can. It's not difficult to imagine how the modern European algebra arose out of the alphabet as such. So at the beginning we would have very simple techniques like writing, counting, drawing, probably cutting. And they build up and combine one with another, and finally produce more or less high cultures. I just give you one of these examples where the bottom-up approach is more helpful than Foucault did really arrive at. Some of you may remember in Les Mots et les Choses how it is translated into English.
The order of things.
The order of things, as in German, okay. In the order of things, there's a long and famous chapter on Linné, the botanist, Swedish botanist who organized the system of plants by taxonomical characteristics, species and genera. But on these 40 pages of Foucault's analysis, a little fact is never mentioned. Also, he lived for 3 years in Uppsala, around the corner of Linné's museum. He could have all seen, and he didn't see it because But what Foucault never mentioned is and was the fact that in Linné's system there are just 24 different species of plants, because there are 24 alphabetic letters from A to Z, because God, the Christian God, had made the botany, the system of plants, in strict order with his alphabet. And so you see by regarding writing systems, you are on a discussion level with Foucault and his results, but you can sometimes not overthrow him, but go a little bit deeper. Then if you agree with me that cultures are more or less defined by their elementary technical media and practices, you may also agree that script is the most elementary among them, and writing and reading in a very conventional sense, I'd say, would define high cultures as such. I'm afraid when I say this sentence, I know how many aggressive minds would call me an old-fashioned white dad and so on, European man. But if we don't understand, but if we don't distinguish in no way between levels of cultures, how could we sensibly speak about the Namikwara in Southern America and Japanese calligraphers? We have to introduce differences, I'd say, and some kinds of writing in question marks, as the famous songlines of the Australian Aborigines, as reported by Bruce Chaplin, are so difficult for at least me to reconstruct that I methodically hold me in distance. This might be einseitig. Impossible. Einseitig. Einseitig. Okay. Forgive me my starting difficulties. Maybe it's a little bit one-sided position I prefer in the course of this crash course, but it is my strong feeling that at least we can reconstruct out of these elementary technical practices like writing and reading the origin of the European and not only European sciences. And that's what really occupies me, on I think should occupy too, because this design has proved so powerful and also so destructive in many cases that we have to do its archaeology. It's not just fun. If I were better educated in writing and reading classical Arabic, Chinese, Japanese, and so on, I'd really try to give you a geographical picture of what may have been the long-term historical case. I think that probably we may think of high cultures such as the Sumerian or Egyptian on the one hand, or the Chinese on the other hand, as great concentric circles, waves, which develop and come to Greece in the one case, and come to Vietnam, to Korea, to Japan, and change their type but construct nevertheless some high cultural regions, not just countries or empires, but more than empires, fields in which are of utmost political actuality if you include India, and then you have to play about that world power. In case somebody among you, and I suppose this is the case, can help me with Chinese or Japanese or Arabic, do so in all open, in all frankness and directness. I'll be just grateful. For myself, this the reward probably will be, this is an idea for the Berlin-based conference next year. The reward for this bottom-up approach would be to not to prove, but to make plausible the idea that even the different gods, the different cultures, let's say around the Mediterranean, celebrate and honor maybe functions of their different writing systems. And today you'll hear something about it. Very helpful and fruitful way into this history of different scripts is the history of their decipherment. And this is a point which is, as to my knowledge, never made by my French structuralist or post-structuralist friends. The point therefore it's a point I'll stress a little bit. Time doesn't allow to be prolific and anecdotic about this history of Champollion's decipherment of the hieroglyphs. But decipherment is not just an historical or archaeological spleen or some scholars, but decipherment is at the heart of the national security agency's occupations right now in Langley, Virginia, I think. And this history of decipherment reminds you from start on that not all preserved scripts have been deciphered. I hear that Maya scripts make good progress, but the famous script of the Easter Island and the Griechen linear A syllabary make not. And some symbol systems, very old symbol systems, like that of the Indus Valley in the Punjab, supposed to be early scripts, probably they are not scripts at all, but handiwork seals or something like that. Just for statistical reasons, we could say so. In general, and this is a sad truth formulated by Alice Cooper, New York, in the 40s of the last century, you must either know the script or the language in order to decipher successfully. In ignorance of both, of script and language, nothing will do. Which is a good memento mori to this difficult relation between spoken language and writing. I'm almost at the end of my preliminary remarks. To be open, I just skipped one little note here. It is my duty and pleasure to introduce you not only to the US media market, but into poetry. Nothing against Google and the US media market, but nevertheless, you see that my case of the European alphabetic script is a case of almost poetry, and this is the most important point we'll make this very morning. Any questions after these preliminary remarks? Yeah. And somebody else disagreed.
I have a question.
Yeah?
Your introduction so far is very fascinating to me. To hear the Foucault from a bottom-up approach, and I'm curious, does Nicholas Luhmann in his conception of autopoiesis and such, do you see that kind of reading into the concept of Foucault's archive, or?
I don't see it. I knew Luhmann quite well in the times to Foucault, whom I just read. And this Luhmann's mind has been undescribable in a way, and there's no, I don't see any chance to accommodate him with other methodological approaches. Luhmann, I confess that Luhmann, in so far as he was also interested in the history of communication systems, sometimes spoke about Gutenberg or invention of the printing press, but he never approached this question in a systematical way. And I didn't get probably the Foucault side of your question.
Just I guess the hearing and reading and the bottom-up approach so far was just really interesting. The bottom-up approach.
The bottom-up, yeah.
So that answers my question.
Yeah.
I think I could make a remark. You once told a story about an anecdote between you and Luhmann about a messenger and a forest. I think that might answer the question a bit, like the difference in what you're asking for. I think it was Luhmann who pointed that out, right? Who said, like, okay.
I had invited Luhmann to my Berlin seminar, and he started smiling and said, "Oh, Herr Kittler, imagine there's a messenger on horseback coming to old Babylon." And
I would ask Niklas Luhmann, I would ask for the content of the message, whereas you would ask for the horse. So Luhmann was much more into the content and the systems that shape the content, whereas what we ask for and what we think is also something we partially learned from Foucault is to ask for the matters or material and things that actually make the transport possible. You need a horse to bring a message to Babylon, or snake, or I don't know what you might want to write on. Snake.
And especially this content needs some materiality of itself. Although what we do this morning is a certain circumscribed region of archaeology. We have to do with material sources or documents or remnants, and without them there would be no proof possible. This is remind me of this very intricate question when we come to the factum, to the brute fact of the Iliad. Is it just a document or is it also a monument? Now I would like to become very serious and pathetic for 2 minutes. I think that language is, that's how it's designed, our home of being. And in so far, language, our mother language, is no medium at all. We can't manipulate it, but she keeps us in her knots. So I try to accommodate Martin Heidegger and Jacques Lacan's la langue mienne. And if this would be the case, which can't be proven, but which can be believed, writing then would be the first medium, and for a long time, the only medium. This doesn't deny that interactions and reactions between spoken and written language do occur. Writing systems influence phonetics and so on. And writing systems, for instance, compensate for homonymies in the mother tongue. The French would be totally unhappy if they had no writing system. Otherwise, le sein, the breast, le sein, the file, le saint, the saint, would include all in one and the same pronunciation. And for Chinese, things seem to be not quite different. Not so different. But after these 2 minutes of sheer pathos, I try to relax and confess that I'm posing myself since quite a few years the question: since when can humans speak? And I'm against 1 million years, 100,000 years. I've practiced some lectures. I've read some books, and it looks as if the famous Homo Neanderthalensis had no suitable larynx to speak. He could certainly make noises and be aggressive and erotic, but spoken language as an articulated system, which then can be written down by a writing system, may have come into existence only with the takeover of the Homo sapiens, at least in Europe. This would be about 40,000 years ago, in the upper valley of the river Danube. It's only 3 or 4 years ago that in a little cave near the river they have discovered, excavated, the first flutes ever built. Little bones, a system of bones of swan, bones of a mammoth, I think, a small bone of a small mammoth. And inside these bones, the first homines sapientes introduced 5 holes. And so they had 5 articulate pitches, no glissando anymore, as probably in the larynx of the Neanderthalensis, but 5 precise holes which you can imagine as metaphors for 5 precise vowels, for instance, or 5 well differentiated consonants. But these are rather unique documents without many parallels. If I have to go into the more profane proto-history of writing, I should start with the Kerbhölzer, which we can't translate into English. Kerben and is notches, and Kerbhölzer are pieces of wood into which you can make these notches, or you can take bones, as in the case of the flutes I just have discussed, and I don't know how in English you express these most ancient systems of counting. I think the earliest archaeological findings are in Africa about 20,000 years ago. These little bones, or not so little bones, with notches, whereby the notches probably stay for sheep or for cow, or what else you have. The shepherd has to control more at morning and at evening whether his sheep are gathered or are lost and gone. In the fourth book of the Odyssey, there's an old sea demon named Proteus who has under his control about 50 female seals, and always he takes his 5 fingers and controls whether all 50 seals are present, and so for 10 times he has to go through his 5 fingers, and this he calls 10 patain, counting by 5. So we may to finish these very few remarks on notches, we could probably say that incrementing and decrementing are the first mathematical operations done by writing, not addition in a more general sense. 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 would be older than 3 plus 4 equals 7. With this generalized addition, we would come to the first high cultures at the famous rivers of the Nile and the Euphrates and the Tigris or Tigris and the Yellow River. Before I do this and bring myself into the most traditional story of writings origin which you can imagine. Just two tentative exclusions I try to do. In very recent times, there is much discussion on a script or writing system on the Balkan, around Belgrade, nowadays Belgrade, about 5,000 to 6,000 years ago. Very beautiful, complicated symbols have been found. In my eyes, too few symbols to make up a script, and too beautiful symbols, so I'd rather say these are hieratic symbols, which is not nothing for the history of forthcoming scripts, but not in itself a script. And the opposite would hold true, as I already mentioned, for the Punjab culture, where too many signs, statistically, too many found signs suggest statistically that's rather seals and not symbols of any phonetical or idiogrammatical way. So let's come to the first hero. Karl August Wittvogel, from the Communist Party, excluded in the roaring 20s of the last century, tried to construct the origin of our culture by parallelizing technological and power system. I think his ideas are still valuable and useful. You see the Neolithic revolution. People come down into the valleys, coordinate their water systems, distribute the water flow of the two big Euphrates and Tigris, or of the Nile, of the Yellow River. By doing so, they produce, intentionally or not, a bureaucracy which centralizes the system, and this would be the origin of the first writing system in the most traditional way. We all are nowadays convinced that about 3,100 or 3,200 before our so-called era writing was invented in the region of Baghdad. Slightly south. In the south of Baghdad, to be more correct. And this invention has has got in the 80s or the last century a famous prehistory. Könnte ich Mann besser haben? Tunisisch Mann Besserat from the University of Austin, Texas, made a great discovery, not only in Mesopotamia, but in the surrounding mountain and desert countries. There had been found archaeologically tremendously many little spheres, little spheres, hollow spheres, spheres with little tokens inside, spheres with little inscriptions outside, all made out of clay, of wet clay, into which you could write what later then became cuneiform writing. And these little objects, she called tokens, had been disregarded as children's toys or something like that. And she turned the key around and said no. These are the first counting systems outside these notches. Think of a merchant, or think of a peasant A, who has to sell 12 sheep to another peasant B, 1,200 miles distant. So an intermediary messenger must be introduced, and this traveler, this traveling salesman, is on his way. The temptation itself to take one shape for his appetite, and then the next, and so, and finally saying, it was my mandate to deliver you 10 sheep instead of 12. And in order to prevent this, the tokens register the number of objects in a way not to be broken by the intermediate salesman. If the token was broken, it was obvious that he was playing around with the truth. So far so good. The only impossible job that Schmann-Fesserat proposed to herself was to prove that all early cuneiform syllabic symbols formally, graphically did arouse out of these symbols, these tokens. And so I prefer still the more conventional solution of the Oxford linguist Roy Harris, who says writing in the sense the Europeans know it is has been a combination from the beginning on. A combination of numerical signs as the tokens or the notches on the one hand, and on the other hand, hieratic symbols for the gods, for the sun, the moon, for the planets, the 5 planets. The moon and the sun, or water as element, also easily recognizable on these early cuneiform signs that nobody will reduce the sun to the sign for 12 sheep. And it's so, finally it's so obvious and not in no way far away from us. I know a woman quite well who's looking up the astrological symbols every week. For her, for me, and so on. And these are the old Babylonian symbols for sun and moon and Jupiter and Venus and Mars and what else have you. So I'd like to say these symbols are not gone away, but they're still in our original, in our culture. And to those divine symbols, if I may say so, become some symbols that are probably also divine as natural. Egyptians or Babylonians have no problems to write the symbol of a penis instead of man, and the symbol of a vulva instead of woman. There's no federal communications committee controlling the symbols and the movies. Now I have to meditate a little bit on shortenings of my historical and empirical material. In order not to confound you by too many facts. Let's stay for a moment with Vogel and the Oriental despoty theory. Let's stay with it for a moment. What Vogel really wanted to convey without writing it, without daring so, was that so-called scribes and secretaries and other subsidiary, secondary institutional functionaries were in fact the absolute powers, and this he wanted to prove with the existence of the Secretary General Joseph Vissarionovich Stalin, and this was why he was expulsed from the Communist Party, because he was white. And so it's much mistaken to talk about scribes and cultures and scribes. You should see in these scribes or mandarins in the old Oriental despoties the real holders of power, and then we probably understand. If you ever come to Paris, you have to go to the Louvre. This goes by itself, and you have to, and you have not to go to the Mona Lisa. Why should you? But to the famous statue of Stele or Stele of King Hammurabi from Babylon about 1,800 before our era, and there you can see. On the top of the statue, there is in relief the god Marduk, big and speaking, dictating, and on his right there is small and submissive King Hammurabi, and Marduk dictates Hammurabi, but then the scribes have put onto this granite, I think, a very hard kind of dark stone. And this is like the kind of a self-allegory of the system, how power and command comes down to those who can read these big stony decalogue for become ironic. In Julian James' breakdown of the bicameral mind, you will find very brilliant remarks on this system of God and King and dictation and hallucinatory hearing of one brain half to the other brain half. I can only give you hints for your lectures and can't go into every detail. What interests me and what didn't interest Julian James is the end of the long inscription called Hammurabi's Stele. After hundreds of laws against adultery and robbery and hands up or feet up or head up behaving or every kind of criminal. Off.
Hands up would be nicer, but it was hands up. I think it's like the basis of Sharia.
Yeah. What I wanted to say, 90% of Hammurabi's law system deals with material crime and its punishment. But the last paragraph deals, so to say, with the formality of criminal law. Suddenly you find the line, and if somebody dares to take off one of the signs of my very inscription will be killed by all the gods, and he who will add one little sign to my inscription, he will die the same way. So this, the final coup of the Oriental despoty seems to me its closure in the sense of Jacques Derrida. It guarantees its non-mutability. I could there are so many parallels. The Persian king's inscriptions of Behistun have the same final menaces, and the most impressive parallel is surely the final chapter of St. John's Apocalypse. You just open the Bible on its last page and you read a brilliant piece of Oriental despotism as regards text and its conservation against forgery and heresy. This cuneiform script has had a longer history than we usually imagine it, and it reformed itself during this long history and invented some translation rules from the old linguistic systems to the new Semitic linguistic systems, giving the same writing system, and this has it made possible to decipher it without too many pains. And these historical adjustments have also made possible the geographical extension of this cuneiform writing, which was taken over by the first Indo-European tribe invading Anatolia, the Hittites, and influenced the Syrian coastal line in Ugarit, and most dramatically became the diplomatic common scripture of the Near East for 500 years, long before, imagine in the 18th century, every European diplomat wrote and read French. And so it happened in the way of this I want to tell you this wonderful story before I come to the Egyptian hieroglyphs, but it's not easy to put it into spoken English, because it's a signifiers play only in writing. Tanja, vielleicht? Sie lassen den Rosny weg oder schreiben Rosny einfach nur das. Ja? Well, I said the cuneiform writing had expanded itself to the north, to Bogaspoy, ancient Hattusha, and the kings and their scribes wrote in this way. And during World War I, Friedrich Rosny, the man who tried to decipher this cuneiform writing in a totally unknown new language, suddenly saw this little inscription. Brot is an ideogram. It's not phonetic, but it's ideogrammatical. Rosny knew it stood for brot, for bread. Sorry, you could write bread in your English description. Yeah. And now if you take your tongue and play around, you bredan esateni, vadama ekuteni. Sounds it not like water, vada? Is the whole sentence not, isn't it? And wrote esatani, is it not essen, to eat, to add? They ate bread, they drank water, and so the language was discovered behind the known signs and the unknown signifying. And Indo-Germanic, Indo-European language studies made a big jump. In 10 minutes, I think we have a little entr'acte. Yeah? Good. So let's start with these very old stories. Second act, Egypt. Everybody knows that the pyramids are the trademark of the ancient Egyptian culture, and that culture probably, following Jacques Lacan, starts always in this way, that the dead fathers and kings are not forgotten but remembered and monumentalized by something which is much more imposing than little letters. This memorization, is it an eternization, is it a divinization? I don't dare to decide. I think we have to leave it open, the questions of whether the kings are they're dead or God. They are, from the outside, sepulchral monuments without any message or sign on it, and inside full of hieroglyphical inscriptions giving the dead man his way to the other side of the Nile in order to get into the land of the blessed and the gods, and stories of all the enemies he killed by thousands and 10,000s, and I try first to give you some concrete feeling of what it is to be in Egypt, and only then we can ask ourselves what it is to write the hieroglyphical signs, which somehow may have been inspired by the older cuneiform forms from Mesopotamia, and not the other way around. In fact, the hieroglyphs are a systematical catastrophe, and that's why it took so long to decipher them only under Napoleon's attack to the Rosetta Stone. The usual phonetic signs of the hieroglyphs can stand for one consonant, can stand for the combination of two consonants as they follow each other, or can stand for the combination of three consonants. And vowels don't exist at all. Point. And every scribe is totally free how to write it. He has, let's say, he wants to write the word M-R-T. He can write M-R-T or M-R-T, or in one big gesture, and N-L-T in one sign. Nobody controls him, and probably they don't like to be controlled. Nowadays we develop some false pity, is my feeling. These poor old writers, scribes without vowels, how difficult was it for them to write down Nefertiti, the queen, and so on. No, probably it was just the other way around. They didn't want to be read by us, by our profane readers' eyes. They wanted to keep their professional mystery. I could go into details which are really nice. Should I do so? Just one token, so to say, because it's very nice and I had it in my last book. This is God, the Egyptian god taught, the god of writing and scripture, famous to Platon's Phaedros, famous to Jacques Derrida's Pharmacie de Platon. data forgot to look it up in Gardner's Egyptian grammar, how thought was written. This is a bird, a very Egyptian bird, in my rendering, my miserable rendering, which is in German is called ibis. In English? No?
I think the same. Yes, I think the same. Yeah.
And this is the God's bird. Yeah? And then there come two, for me, unreadable consonantic signs which try to express the phonetic content of the God's name. And then another symbol, a sitting divinity, more or less painted like a statue, not as a real God, but as his stony rendering. And so you see the multi-dimensionality of this hieroglyphical script. And my final point before the little break is how this multidimensional imploded for good and for once, with dramatic historical consequences up to this very day and morning. These are what I propose to you now for 3 minutes are tentative archaeological results of Harvard University excavations in Upper Egypt in the 90s of the last century. I can't guarantee the scientific results, sorry, but these are the but to my knowledge, as far as I know, nobody has contradicted these new hypotheses. How? The question is quite simple. How come we? The question is produced by the fact that the graphical forms of our Semitic consonant alphabet are certainly connected to the forms of some Egyptian hieroglyphs. So we have to find a historical way how to make this translation or transmission from multidimensionality to this very simple principle: one consonant, one symbol, and nothing else. No determinatives, no painted birds and ibises, just ongoing consonantic alphabetic text. And the answer seems to be that about 1,800 before, Egyptian officers commanded over auxiliary soldiers, troops, obviously engaged from poor nomadic regions like the Sinai mountain. And these mercenaries were not able to, and not intelligent or not highbrow enough to decipher the complicated Egyptian hieroglyphic writing system. So the officers, when they gave written commands, orders, reduced themselves to those consonant signs where one sign stood just for one consonant and not for two and not for three. And this was a selection made for the sake of the geistig armen, mentally poor or spiritually poor, as in the Sermon of the Mountain. If this would be true, and this would be a great delivery and help. We could see once again that cultural change is determined mostly by intercultural contact. Sudden contact between soldiers and officers produces something new. It mustn't stay long. It suffices some years and the system is on the way. This would be the point one, the positive point, and the second point is much more dramatic, as you may have imagined. All the speculations of Sigmund Freud and Jan Assmann and many others about the deep identity between the Semitic consonantic alphabet on the one hand and Mosaic monotheistic message on the other hand would be an illusion. Sheer, blunt illusion, which always tends to the classical case of cultural history top down, from the Mount of Sinai to the simple Israeli scribe. No, if it goes the other way around by Sinaitic mercenaries, this would be the bottom-up principle in its sheer elegance. Give us some 10 minutes.
Thank you.
Question. If you would clarify what you mean by high culture.
It's almost tautological. I'd say high culture is a culture with one or more well-developed script systems. We nowadays can write almost all. But we can do this thanks to rather elementary, binary, elegant script system applicable to many fields or domains of knowledge and perception. And the case of the priest, which I try to address this morning, would be another case where sound and numbers and musical pitches could be articulated by one and the same alphabetic signs, and this could be a working definition or instantiation of a high culture. I'm not good in definition. But you see how it comes together, how it works ineinander.
And what will it mean in today's terms? What will be high culture today?
Our binarism. Put everything in software, into elegant software, and make it algorithmically manageable. Decoding genes and studying the Higgs boson or what else they have in Geneva. Try to concentrate and make things more sensual in continuing, so that questions of high culture can be more easily addressed. Just before I come to these near Oriental alphabets, Semitic ones, Aramaic ones, let me give the one example where I would say this is not a high cultural event, but the contrary. The Egyptians and the Babylonians, by the way, had very complicated but rather precise factual expressions for the wonderful number of P or phi, the relation between the diameter and the circumference of a perfect circle. But when King Salomo built his temple, following the Old Testament, he engaged an architect from Tyrus, from Phoenicia, and ordered a spherical building, the spherical temple, and gave this theorem the measurement diameter 10, I think 10 elbows, and circumference 13. And this is, in my eyes, a brilliant example of low culture. Because it's not only very wrong, but misleading to replace a transcendental number by a natural number. without even discussing the problem. But now to the other way around, to the everlasting glory of the Semitic consonantic alphabets. Let's start with them. The first question I posed myself, without being able to answer it conclusively, why are scripts so important to nomadic cultures? The answer could be, tentative answer could be, nomadic cultures don't like to transport heavy statues and other stony representations of the gods. They, in the case of the Jews, in the case of the Arabs, in the case of the Mongols, they prefer light books in their material likeness. The probable origin from Egypt via Sinai to Palestine, I try to tell you. The fundamental linguistic relation between the Egyptian hieroglyphs on the one hand and the Phoenician and Jewish and Arabic consonant alphabets on the other hand lie in the fact that almost every concept, be it verbal, be it nominal, is made up by three consonants, as in these three consonantic signs in the Egyptian hieroglyphic writing system. Three consonants are written down one after the other, and these are the bones of writing, and the flesh of writing, that is the three vowels A, I, and U, also to say poetic actual inspirations coming to the bone, or embellishing the bone, actualizing the bone, poetizing the bone. In any case, it's in difference to our vocalic alphabet, it's always an act of solving a riddle, of deciphering in a sense. A bony, cool, consonantic texture you have to fill up with your own voice, your vocalic, livid voice, living voice. And nevertheless, this Semitic consonantic alphabet seems to have become the origin or the inspiration of most writing systems which still are around in the world, be it Coptic in Ethiopia, be it Sanskrit, Devanagari, and many others. And what is the decisive point? Everybody knows it. you can tell it to yourself or to me. The number of signs for the first time is strictly limited, is finite. The alphabet gets, mathematically speaking, kind of cardinality. So and so many or so few letters, consonants, form this alphabet, and in fact it's just 22 in the case of the classical Hebrew, for instance. And these always the same letters repeat and repeat, always crashing in the same old car, always writing in the same old mold. So it becomes mechanical and therefore probably transportable to other cultures, other languages, other religions, if I may say so. Strangely enough, yet the first occurrence of an alphabet in our sense, has not the graphical forms of the later Semitic letters, consonants, but it's written in cuneiform signs in the northern Syrian city of Ras el-Shamra, formerly Ugarit. Think of all the dying people right now in these regions of the world. And for the very first time in Ugarit, about 1300 before, you have a tablet filled with, and only with, 30 signs standing for the sequence of Aleph, Beta, Gamma, Dalet, and so on. So for the first time, you have not only the cardinal value of the alphabetic signs, but also, to say the Georg Cantor, the ordinal. Aleph is the first, and from Ugarit up to now, this is somehow of an exploit. No? And Bet, our Bet, is a second, and so on. And I don't believe that every one of these later Hebrew and Semitic signs has an iconic iconic meaning, at least to my knowledge. This functions for Aleph, the ox, and Bet, the house, as in Bethlehem, but not for Gamel, for instance, because Gamel can't be derived from camel. There were no camel in the ancient Near East. No chance. That is the whole functionality of the new consonantic alphabet can be written down in cuneiform signs or in the new Semitic alphabetic signs derived probably from the hieroglyphs, as I told you, shows very clearly that you shouldn't be fascinated too much about this optical, graphical, economical aspect of the science of the writing systems, their functionality is mightier than their optical appearance. And the historical riddle or wonder how it came that that an order was introduced into the science which every child since then has to learn by rote. It's our job. When he becomes 5 or 6, we have to learn it as an Ugarit. I've tried often to explain it to myself with no bigger way. I've just one phrase, one clue, as they would say in detective stories. I know from you see all these Ugarit excavations in the Paris Louvre, and what you don't see, obviously intentionally don't see, is the fact that among all these alphabetic inscriptions and abecedaria, there have been found 200 tablets in the Minoan Linear B writing system, which was contemporary on the island of Crete and in heavy commercial relation to this harbor town of Ugarit. And I think that it was the first, and this Minoan B linear, this syllabary Minoan Linear B, I have to address again, is certainly the first perfect vocalic syllabary of European and de facto Indo-European language. This is now my profession, my call for the next minute, to make it so clear as possible to you that we can take as difference between the Semitic and the Indo-European alphabet. I don't want to become polemic, but in the case of my bygone friend Jacques, sometimes I'm tempted to become polemic, because only historical knowledge and facts count and not speculations about phonologocentrism. Okay, before we go to the case of Greece, what are these trigrams and the one tetragrammaton as constitutive of Semitic languages and scripts? You have, for instance, the three consonants K, T, B, and you can vocalize them in many, many ways. And from K, T, B, you can get the book, Kati. He wrote, she read, it's an incredible fan, so to say, fan, like an essence fan of possible significations, meanings, all having to do with writing and reading. You could take another 3 gram K T L B, and you got student, study, and you put it into the plural, and you got Taliban. And you have the exceptional case of not only 3 but 4 consonants, and you got Aleph. Can you tell us? The Tetragrammaton? Sag's mal.
Jud, Hey, Vav, Hey. G, H, W, H.
This is the name of God, as you know. The name we never should pronounce. Only the high priest once in a year was allowed in the Jerusalem temple to pronounce this holy word made up of 4 consonants. I'll add just one simple idea of my Freiburg teacher, Johannes Lohmann, that it's obviously more difficult to contain all the possible meaning of KTB, writing, reading, library, book, and so on, into one concept in the sense that we, Europeans, conceive the concept, permit me this only obvious paradox. I think every culture has its own concept of the concept, and this Semitic concept of the concept is somehow transcendent. If we in the old Greek language have a horse, okay, we can decline it. The horse, hippos, genital, hippoi, hippo, hippon, hippo, genital. And hip remains as a consonantic and vocalic root. It remains constant, just as a KTB remains constant in these tetragrammatological formations. Only hip is much more unambiguous, or much more simple, much more down to earth, so to say. It's just a horse and nothing else. And this makes it, for Europe, easier to develop sciences than religions.